Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Yeah, glad to be back.
Today, we're tackling a pretty pervasive issue, one that's been making waves, literally microplastics.
Literally?
You've given us a really interesting mix of sources for this one, from Wikipedia to some pretty in-depth scientific papers, and even some news stories.
Yeah, good mix.
So we're ready to get small, really small, and explore this complex topic.
Absolutely.
We're going to uncover where these microplastics come from, how they're sneaking into our environment, and what that means for, ecosystems and even human health.
Yeah, it's a big one.
So get ready for some surprising facts, because we are going deep.
Deep dive.
Okay, so before we go any further, let's start with the basics.
Sure.
What exactly are microplastics? I mean, I know they're tiny.
Right.
But how tiny are we talking?
Well, picture a sesame seed on your burger bun. That's about the upper limit of what we consider a microplastic.
Okay.
Anything smaller than 5 millimeters falls into this category.
Oh.
And what's really interesting is that they come in two main types, primary and secondary microplastics.
Two types, huh? I'm guessing one is a bit more sinister than the other.
Well, sinister might be a bit strong, but you're right, they have different origins.
Okay.
Primary microplastics are those that are intentionally manufactured to be small.
Okay.
So think about those microbeads that used to be in so many exfoliating face washes and toothpastes.
Right.
Thankfully, many companies have phased those out after research showed just how pervasive and potentially harmful they were.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
But what about those secondary microplastics?
Right.
Those sound a bit more like the villains of our story.
You could say that secondary microplastics are the result of larger plastic items breaking down over time.
Okay.
You think about a plastic water bottle tossed on the side of the road.
Yeah.
As it sits there exposed to the elements, sunlight, wind, rain, they slowly break it down into smaller and smaller pieces.
Right.
Eventually, those pieces become microplastics.
So it's not just about what we're directly putting into the environment. It's also about the legacy of plastic we've already accumulated.
That's right.
Our sources paint a pretty grim picture of just how widespread this microplastic pollution has become.
Yeah, it's concerning.
It's everywhere.
It really is. Microplastics are turning up everywhere in our oceans and rivers, of course.
Right.
But also in the soil, in the air we breathe.
Wow.
Even in Arctic sea ice and the snows of Mount Everest.
Mount Everest.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Look at a global issue.
It really drives home the point that this isn't just a coastal problem, it's a global issue.
For sure.
Speaking of grim pictures, one of our sources mentioned a rather dramatic example of how microplastics can enter the environment, the 2012 nurdle spill in Hong Kong.
Ah, yes. The nurdle spill, a stark illustration of just how quickly things can go wrong.
So for those of us who don't know,
Yeah.
what is a nurdle?
Nurdles are those tiny plastic pellets that are used in manufacturing.
Okay.
And during a typhoon, a shipping container filled with these nurdles was knocked overboard, releasing a staggering 150 tons of them into the waters off Hong Kong.
150 tons, it's almost impossible to imagine.
It's an amount equal to the weight of about 25 adult elephants.
Wow.
And while this was a particularly dramatic event, it highlights a significant source of microplastic pollution.
Okay.
The accidental spillage of these plastic pellets during transport and manufacturing processes.
It's a sobering reminder that even with good intentions, things can go awry.
Definite.
But beyond these accidental spills, our everyday choices are also contributing to the problem.
That's right.
One statistic that really jumped out at me from our sources is that 35% of all microplastics in the ocean come from textiles, particularly synthetic fabrics like polyester and nylon.
Yeah. It's a huge amount, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something that we often don't think about
Yeah.
every time we wash our clothes, particularly those made from synthetic materials.
Wow.
Tiny microfibers shed from the fabric.
Okay.
These fibers are often too small to be caught by washing machine filters.
Oh, so they just go right through.
They do. And end up being flushed into wastewater treatment plants.
And then what?
And because those plants aren't equipped to fully remove these tiny particles,
Right.
they end up being released into rivers and eventually the ocean.
So even something as simple as doing laundry can contribute to microplastic pollution.
It's true.
Wow, it seems like it's really hard to avoid contributing to this problem.
It can feel that way.
And it's not just our clothes.
No.
One of our sources mentioned that even bottled water isn't immune to this problem.
Right. Studies have found that a significant percentage of bottled water samples contain microplastics,
Really?
sometimes even at higher concentrations than tap water.
Wow.
This is likely due to a combination of factors, including the breakdown of the plastic bottles themselves, as well as potential contamination during the bottling process.
So even those convenient on-the-go choices can have these hidden consequences.
They can.
It's definitely a wake-up call to think more carefully about the plastic we use and how we dispose of it.
For sure.
But all this talk of microplastics being everywhere, why should we, the listeners, care?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the reason this matters is because microplastics have far-reaching impacts.
Okay.
Not just on the environment, but potentially on human health as well.
Let's start with the environmental impacts. One of our sources mentioned that microplastics are often mistaken for food by marine animals, and that can't be good.
It's not. Marine organisms from tiny zooplankton to whales can ingest microplastics, mistaking them for food.
Oh, no.
This can lead to a whole host of problems.
Like what?
Well, for one, the microplastics can create a false sense of fullness, leading to starvation.
Oh, wow.
They can block digestive tracts, causing internal injuries.
Oh, that's awesome.
And perhaps most concerning is that they can act like tiny sponges, soaking up harmful pollutants from the surrounding water.
So these microplastics are essentially becoming little poison pills that are working their way through the marine food web.
Exactly. And as these contaminated microplastics are ingested by larger and larger animals, they can accumulate in their tissues, a process known as bioaccumulation.
Right.
This means that predators at the top of the food chain,
Including us.
humans who consume seafood,
Right.
are potentially ingesting higher concentrations of these toxins.
So it's not just about saving the whales, it's about protecting our own health as well.
Precisely, and beyond the direct impacts of ingestion.
Okay.
Microplastics can also have more subtle but equally significant effects on ecosystems.
Okay. How so?
Well, they can alter the physical properties of sediments, making it harder for organisms to burrow and thrive.
Interesting.
They can interfere with the growth and reproduction of marine plants.
Wow.
And they can even disrupt the delicate balance of microbial communities that play a crucial role in nutrient cycling.
So they're really messing with the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, they can have cascading effects.
One of our sources mentioned that microplastics are even impacting something called blue carbon ecosystems.
Yes.
Can you explain what that means and why it's important?
Sure. Blue carbon ecosystems are coastal habitats like mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes that are incredibly efficient at capturing and storing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
So they're helping to combat climate change.
They are. They're like nature's carbon sinks, playing a vital role in mitigating climate change.
Okay.
But what's concerning is that microplastic accumulation in these ecosystems can hinder their growth and ability to sequester carbon.
So microplastics are not only a pollution problem, they're also adding fuel to the climate change fire.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted issue.
That's pretty alarming. And then there's the question of how they affect us humans. What does the research say about the potential health impacts of microplastics?
Well, this is where things get a bit trickier.
Okay.
The field of study is relatively new, and the long-term health consequences of microplastic exposure are still being investigated.
So there are a lot of unknowns.
There are, but what we do know is that microplastics have been found in human blood, feces, and even the placenta.
Wow, so they're really getting inside of us.
They are suggesting that we're ingesting and absorbing these particles.
That's a bit unnerving to think about.
It is, and while we don't fully understand the implications yet,
Right.
there's growing concern that microplastics could be contributing to a range of health issues.
Okay.
Some studies have linked certain plastic additives,
Okay.
like phthalates and bisphenol, a BPA, to endocrine disruption,
And what does that mean?
which can interfere with hormonal systems and potentially lead to reproductive and developmental problems.
Some of her sources also mentioned that microplastics could potentially trigger inflammation in the body
Yes.
and even contribute to the development of certain cancers.
Right.
But more research is needed to confirm these links.
Absolutely. It's important to emphasize that while there's a lot of research underway, we're still in the early stages of understanding the full scope of microplastics' potential impact on human health.
Okay.
But the evidence we do have is enough to warrant concern and encourage us to take steps to minimize our exposure.
So it's not a time to panic, but it's definitely a time to be aware and proactive.
I agree.
But what can we do about this? It feels like such a massive, overwhelming problem.
It is a complex issue, no doubt, but that doesn't mean we're powerless.
Okay.
There are steps we can take, both individually and collectively, to address the microplastic problem.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. Let's start with what we can do on a personal level.
Sure.
What are some simple changes we can make to reduce our plastic footprint and minimize our contribution to this problem?
One of the most effective things you can do is simply reduce your plastic use.
Okay.
Choose reusable alternatives whenever possible, like refillable water bottles, cloth shopping bags, and reusable food containers.
Those are all good ideas.
Yeah, and these small changes can make a big difference over time.
And those microbeads we talked about earlier, we can avoid those altogether by checking product labels and choosing cosmetics and personal care items that don't contain them.
Exactly, and be mindful of your clothing choices as well. Natural fibers like cotton and wool shed fewer microfibers than synthetic materials.
That makes sense.
And when you do wash synthetic clothing, consider using a laundry bag designed to catch microfibers.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Or look into washing machine filters that can trap those tiny particles.
Those are great tips, but what about the bigger picture?
Right.
What can be done on a societal level to tackle this microplastic monster?
Well, there's a lot that needs to happen.
Like what?
We need stricter regulations on plastic production and waste management.
Okay.
We need to invest in innovative technologies for removing microplastics from wastewater and other environments.
So finding ways to clean up the mess.
Exactly. And we need to hold companies accountable for the microplastics they release into the environment.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
It is.
Thankfully, some progress is being made.
Yeah.
The Microbead-Free Waters Act in the U.S. and similar bans in other countries have helped to reduce the amount of primary microplastics entering our waterways.
Yeah, it's a good start.
But there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely. We need to continue advocating for stronger policies and supporting organizations that are working to address plastic pollution.
Okay.
Consumer pressure can be a powerful driver of change.
Yeah, I think people are becoming more aware of this problem.
They are.
And that's a good thing.
It is.
By choosing products and supporting companies committed to sustainability, we can help shift the tide.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that even small actions can add up to a big impact.
They really can, and that's where a deep dive continues. It's really interesting because it's not just a problem of, cleaning up what's already out there.
Right.
Scientists and engineers are actually hard at work developing ways to prevent more microplastics from even entering the environment in the first place.
Now, that's what I like to hear.
Yeah.
It feels like for every problem, there's someone out there trying to find a solution.
That's the hope.
So what are some of the most promising innovations they're working on?
Well, one area that's seeing a lot of progress is in wastewater treatment. So conventional treatment plants aren't very effective at catching those tiny microplastics, so they kind of slip through the cracks and end up back in the water cycle.
Yeah, it's like trying to sift sand through a colander.
Exact.
Those tiny grains are bound to get through.
A great analogy.
So what are they doing differently?
Well, researchers are developing new technologies like advanced filtration systems that act like microscopic nets capturing those tiny particles.
Oh, wow.
Some are even experimenting with using magnetic nanoparticles that can attract and bind to microplastics, making them easier to remove.
That sounds pretty high-tech.
It is.
I remember reading in one of our sources about a young scientist who won a science fair by using ferrofluid, that magnetic liquid stuff, to extract microplastics from water.
That's right. Fionn Ferreira, his project is a great example of how creative thinking can lead to these innovative solutions.
Yeah.
It's pretty inspiring to see the younger generation tackling these challenges with such ingenuity.
It is. But beyond technology, we also need to look at policies and regulations to stem the flow of microplastics.
Absolutely, because even the best technology won't be enough if we don't address those root causes of the problem.
So are there any good examples of governments taking action on this front?
Absolutely. The European Union has been a front runner in this area.
Okay.
They've banned intentionally added microplastics in products like cosmetics.
Oh, wow.
And are working on regulations to reduce microplastic release from textiles, tires, and other sources.
So they're really trying to tackle it from multiple angles.
They are taking that multi-pronged approach.
Which makes sense considering how many sources of microplastics there are.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
We need a combination of bans, regulations, incentives for innovation, and public awareness campaigns to encourage responsible consumption.
Yeah, we can't just rely on technology to fix this.
No, we need a behavioral change as well.
I also noticed in our sources some initiatives in other parts of the world, like bans on plastic bags and polystyrene containers in Haiti and several Caribbean countries.
Yeah, those are really encouraging examples of how even smaller nations can take significant steps to protect their environments.
Right.
It demonstrates that change can happen at all levels.
So we've covered the sources of microplastics.
Yes.
Their impact on both the environment and human health and some of the promising solutions being developed.
Right.
But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier, the unknowns.
Okay.
There's still so much we don't know about microplastics.
That's true.
What are some of the key questions scientists are still trying to answer?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is simply quantifying the problem.
What do you mean?
We're still trying to grasp just how much microplastic is out there, where it's accumulating, and how it moves through the environment.
Yeah, it's hard to fight an enemy you can't see clearly.
Exactly. And even with improved detection and monitoring techniques, there are limitations. For example, we're currently only able to detect microplastics down to a certain size.
Okay.
There could be even smaller particles, nanoplastics, that we're not yet equipped to measure, and these could potentially have even greater impacts.
So it's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Right.
Always revealing another layer beneath.
Exactly. And then there's the question of long-term health effects on humans.
Right.
We're really just beginning to understand how microplastic exposure might affect us over time.
Yeah, most of the studies we've seen have focused on those short-term effects.
Right.
But the long-term consequences of chronic exposure are still largely unknown.
They are, and we need more research to understand how microplastics might contribute to chronic diseases, developmental issues, and even genetic changes across generations.
That's a scary thought.
It is, and it's not just about the physical presence of microplastics in our bodies.
Right.
It's also about the cocktail of chemicals they carry.
Okay.
Those additives, pollutants, and even pathogens that can hitch a ride on these tiny particles.
So they're like little Trojan horses.
Exactly.
Sneaking in a hidden payload of potentially harmful substances.
A very apt analogy.
So we need to figure out how these complex mixtures might affect human health.
We do. And as we delve deeper into these intricate connections between microplastics, human health, and the environment, it becomes even more apparent that we need a holistic approach to address this challenge.
It makes sense. You can't just focus on one aspect of the problem. You need to consider the interconnectedness of it all.
Precisely. And that requires collaboration across disciplines.
Okay.
Scientists, policymakers, engineers, industry leaders, and of course the public.
Yeah, we all have a role to play in finding solutions.
We do.
So where do we go from here? What's next in our deep dive into the world of microplastics?
Well, now that we have a better understanding of the problem and its complexities,
Uh-huh.
it's time to explore some of the most promising solutions being developed and implemented around the world.
Solutions that offer hope for a cleaner, healthier future. Get ready, deep divers. We're about to embark on a journey of innovation and discovery as we search for ways to combat this microscopic menace. Okay, so we've talked about the problem. It's definitely a big one. But what about solutions? Are there any glimmers of hope on the horizon for tackling this microplastic mess?
Absolutely. One of the most exciting areas of development is in materials. Science researchers are working on creating new types of plastics that are designed to break down more easily in the environment.
So instead of those stubborn plastics that can linger for centuries, we're talking about plastics that will biodegrade, leaving behind no harmful residues.
Exactly. Biodegradable plastics are made from renewable resources like plant starches or other organic materials, and they're designed to decompose into natural substances like water and carbon dioxide, much like a banana peel would break down in your compost bin.
That sounds amazing, like a total game changer. But what about all the plastic that's already out there in the environment? Those trillions of tiny microplastic particles floating in the ocean, trapped in the soil, even circulating in the air. Is there any way to clean up this mess we've already made?
It's a huge challenge for sure, but scientists and engineers are rising to the occasion. One promising approach is bioremediation,
Okay.
which involves using microorganisms like bacteria and fungi that have a natural appetite for breaking down certain types of plastics.
So it's like harnessing nature's own cleanup crew to tackle the plastic problem.
Exactly. Imagine deploying these tiny microbial armies to clean up contaminated areas. It's a fascinating and potentially powerful solution, and there are also more mechanical methods being explored,
Okay.
like specialized boats and floating barriers designed to collect and remove plastic debris from rivers and oceans.
Yeah. One of our sources even talked about using drones equipped with sensors to detect and map microplastic accumulation in remote areas. It seems like technology is really being put to the test in this fight against microplastics.
It is. It's remarkable how technology is being harnessed to address this challenge, but it's important to remember that technology alone isn't a silver bullet.
Right. We can't just rely on some magical invention to fix everything.
Exactly. We need a multifaceted approach that addresses the problem from all angles.
Right. It's about reducing our reliance on plastic in the first place improving waste management systems, developing those innovative cleanup technologies, and perhaps most importantly, changing our own behaviors and consumption patterns.
Absolutely. It's about moving away from that linear take, make, dispose model to a circular economy where plastics are designed to be reused, recycled, or biodegraded, keeping them out of the environment as much as possible.
It sounds like a big shift in thinking is needed.
It does.
So this deep dive has taken us from the depths of the ocean to the air we breathe, uncovering the hidden world of microplastics. We've learned about their sources, their impacts, and some of the innovative solutions being developed to address this pervasive problem.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. Right. And it's clear that this is an issue that demands our attention and action.
Yeah.
So now we turn to you, our listeners, armed with this knowledge. What changes will you make to protect yourselves and the planet? Will you choose reusable products over single-use plastics? Will you support policies that promote sustainable practices? Will you make a conscious effort to reduce your overall plastic footprint? These are all questions worth pondering.
They are. And remember, every small step we take from choosing reusable products to supporting sustainable policies can contribute to a healthier future for ourselves and for generations to come.
So until next time, keep diving deep.